plant medicines are, from your perspective, something that the divine can speak to us through.
Exactly, and not just in entheogenic plants, but in all plants, because all plants contain creation.
David, let's talk a little bit about your own journey into the entheogenic world.
I was high in the mountains, way, way far away from the culture that I had left behind that was really toxic and really confused. And I had actually entered into the old world. I had entered into the world of magic and the world of the archetypes.
What you're saying, albeit framed in a way that I have never heard before, at least so eloquently.
It was not like anything that I had experienced previously or since.
Welcome back to the Webdelics podcast, and we have with us today David Crow. We are going to talk about having some perspective on the real risks associated with entheogens. But before we get started, David, what exactly is an entheogen? That's kind of a $5 word. What does it mean exactly?
Well, my understanding is that it is that which brings God to life. It is that which awakens the awareness, the sensitivity of divinity around us and inside of us, that which opens our inner senses, opens our mind, opens our heart to the divine, Theo, God. That's a technical translation, entheogen, Theo as in theology, Theo as in God, the study of God, that which awakens or generates God. But God is already awake, and so what it means is that which brings the experience of God to life inside of our own awareness. That's how I would define it.
That's a pretty big mic-dropping definition. And I'll just make explicit what's implicit. Plant medicines are, from your perspective, something that the divine can speak to us through.
Exactly, and not just in entheogenic plants, but in all plants, because all plants contain creation. All plants are the expression of the cosmological intelligence of the universe that is being expressed on the earth, in the biosphere of the earth. And we are made of those plants. And so that divine intelligence is inside all plants. And it is inside the food that we eat, and that's what helps us to be healthy. And it's inside all of the medicinal plants that we use from traditional healing systems. And so everything that comes from plants can be said to be an expression of that cosmological intelligence. And so the entheogenic plants have a particular power. They have a particular effect on human consciousness. But everything we eat has an effect on human consciousness also. And all of the herbal medicines that we use for healing have an effect on human consciousness as well. It's just that the entheogens are in a class on their own because their effect is so pronounced, and it takes us into the world of the divine and mythology and the world of the archetypes. It takes us into the collective Gaian consciousness extremely rapidly. But we find counterparts with a lot of herbs that have been used to support meditation and support delving into altered states. So it isn't just the entheogens that affect our consciousness. All plants affect our consciousness, but the entheogens are the topic of our conversation because they affect our consciousness so dramatically, so quickly, that it makes us question the nature of reality, because it can put us into some state that appears to be more real than reality. So a few opening thoughts there.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you shared those. They are scary for a lot of people because of the exact qualities that you just described. I can eat lettuce and arugula and a grape, and they may have these entheogenic qualities within them somewhere. But you're right. I'm not questioning reality if I eat a pineapple. Well, unless everyone tells me that pineapple's delicious and I hate it. But outside of that, there's not the fear associated with these, and perhaps that is the unique, the source of some of the controversy and the unique stigma, and a lot of the drama, as well as the political back and forth that is associated with plant medicines in particular.
Right. Well, when you say plant medicines, I would clarify entheogens, because as a professional herbalist, I regard all plants as medicines. But you are correct. There is a stigma, maybe, in many cultures there has not been. But what I would say in response to that is that we should have a healthy respect for anything that's powerful. And these plants are very powerful. And therefore, they have always been considered sacraments, and they have always been considered to be deities. They have been considered to be very sacred things. That's what a sacrament means. It means that which reveals the sacred. And so they have always had a place historically in ceremony and ritual. They've always had a kind of ceremonial, ritualistic container within a container of a culture, within a container of a cosmological worldview. And therefore, they have always represented a doorway into a different realm. And if we look historically at some of the traditions where entheogens were used in a very organized religion type of format, actually, we find, the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, and we find the Soma cult of India, ancient India, where the Vedas came from. And we find that these plants are considered to be doorways into immortality, transcendence. So highly regarded, but also approached with great reverence, you see. And so there's all of these other kinds of emotions other than fear that we should also take into account, because if we regard them as being sources of power, then we should have healthy fear, but we should also have reverence and use them wisely. And so that's the broader picture. And I think that what's happening now is that these entheogens are coming into our culture, and we don't really have any context for them in terms of, a religion or a spiritual container. And so therefore, they can generate a lot of fear because people are not actually being raised in these traditions and taught how to use them. And they are actually having a pretty profound effect on a completely different kind of psychology than humans had in the past. You see, this is another aspect. We could say that entheogens represent the power of the Gaian mind, the cosmological intelligence of the earth. And this is a completely different state of mind than certainly people in contemporary times. Our nervous systems, especially now in the last 20 years, especially, with technology, our nervous systems collectively have completely changed from our ancestors. And so we're bringing in something very powerful and very ancient and something very timeless as well, and awakening something that our nervous system has no reference point for at all.
Some of the conversations that are had around entheogens are due to the association that they have with indigenous cultures or non-modern Western cultures, sort of wrapped in this sense of mystery or exoticism, or even, oh, it's weird or new age or woo-woo, due to the fact that those cultures that have maintained some connection with them all along, or that may have ritualized them and not sort of disappeared from the consciousness of those people living within those, right? It creates a situation where, as opposed to our culture, if it's not like ancient Christianity, or if it did, had this as a regular part of its sacrament that has continued consistently throughout the years, unlike some of these other indigenous cultures. And I say that because when you explicitly mention the Eleusinian mysteries, and for those who don't know, those were religious cults that were associated with ancient Greece. Although the ancient Greeks culture has not continued into the present day, it is such a foundation of our culture, and there has been such a through line that you raise that particular religious tradition with regards to entheogens is something I want to step into for a minute before we get into some of the other topics, because it's actually very important and it's very interesting. You are referencing, like I just said, the Eleusinian mysteries that are associated with certain fertility deities in ancient Greece. But then you also use some words that folks in the audience might not understand that are similarly associated with ancient Greek religion, but have had a comeback in the past 50 or so years. The Gaian mindset, or the universal consciousness that is tied to this whole concept of Gaia. Can you explain what Gaia is and what those terms are, how they relate to ancient Greek religion, because they do, and then what exactly you're talking about when you're referring to entheogens being connected to them?
Well, Gaia is a term that has been used in various contexts, and it was used in our contemporary society starting, I don't know, when did it become popularized? 20, 30 years ago with Earth Day or something like that. It had to do with the concept that the Earth is alive. Well, that's not a new concept, okay? That was a given in all of these ancient cultures. They knew that. And it is correct to say that in ancient Greece, that there was this tradition of worship. And the Eleusinian mysteries, which took place at in a temple, and were open to everybody, almost. The only requirement was that you could not have murdered somebody, but otherwise everybody was invited from all over the old world to participate in these ceremonies that were based on the mythology of death and rebirth, and therefore it links to the awareness of the cosmological intelligence of nature. Okay, and so this was a very interesting phenomena, because this was a tradition of using an entheogenic drink, kykeon, which was prepared in great secrecy. But the effects were so profound that historians and scholars, as you know, have concluded that it could not have been anything but an entheogen. And it was an all-night ceremony after rigorous preparation and initiations, so that the people who went in were psychologically and physically prepared for the experience. And then the ceremony progressed through the night, and at the peak of the ceremony, there was a visionary experience, a collective visionary experience. Now, this is the same as what we find with ayahuasca in the Amazon. And that's why the early researchers named the active compound in ayahuasca telepathine, because people were having a collective visionary experience. And so that was also being reported. and these mysteries. Now, what's truly amazing about this is that this was a public ceremony that went on for 1,000 years, and it shaped civilization. It was the basis of incredible flourishing of art and music and mysticism and writing, and it influenced generations of philosophers and scholars and writers, and the same could be said about the Soma cult of ancient India. That was a source also of the Vedas, the earliest written religious text is the Rig Veda. And in the Rig Veda, there is what's called the Soma Mandala, which is a collection of hymns to Soma, describing how it's prepared and how, when it is consumed, that it lifts you into the realm of light, and it reveals the gods and the goddesses, and it makes you immortal. There are all of these references to the entheogenic experience, and those are the oldest written texts of religion. So what we see then is that both of these situations, these cultures, both of these collective uses, this would be the counterpart to organized religion like 2,000 years ago. Okay, this was organized religion. This was true mysticism, using a sacrament that actually revealed the sacred. It wasn't imaginary. It wasn't like use your imagination, and it really did it. Okay, so that's a little bit of further background to articulate what the Kaikion and the Soma were all about. But the term Gaia is really about the intelligence of the earth, that the earth is a living being. And so this is a very profound, deep level of visionary experience, which we've already touched on, because we're already talking about how entheogens have power to reveal that, and how herbal medicine and our food has power to nourish us and to heal us. And this is all about the intelligence of the biosphere of the earth. And the biosphere of the earth is a profound intelligence. It is more profound than we can imagine. And all we have to do is look inside the body. The human body has quadrillions of events happening every instant that are more profound than we can imagine, that we can fathom. And this is the intelligence of the earth working inside of us at the cellular level, every moment, every instant. And this is in everything on the earth. And this came out of the evolution of the cosmological intelligence. So that's my short definition.
A couple of points. First of all, a cool thing, if anyone ever watching this or listening to this can do if you're in Greece, is some very limited but still in existence ruins of the temples where these mysteries took place are still in existence. I actually drove by them when I was in Greece years ago, and so it's just sort of fun knowing this additional connection that those ruins have to something that is having a real renaissance today. Number two, you didn't explicitly say it, but one of the things that is embedded within what you've said about Gaia or Gaian consciousness is that the word Gaia itself, it literally was the name of the ancient Greek goddess of the earth. We know her as Mother Earth more frequently, but she literally was viewed as a living being who had anger when her children were destroyed, who was furious if she was mistreated, who had an almost incomprehensible power. Even the Olympian gods were afraid of truly incurring her wrath. And she also was able to separate from the biomass of the earth and manifest, which is to me related to what you're saying as to the way we each are living separations and manifestations of this larger biomass of the earth. But I've got to be a little bit of a difficult Western science-oriented person in saying, well, yes, we're all from the earth. Yes, we all ingest things of the earth. Yes, we have intelligence as things that came from the earth. but how can the earth itself have intelligence? How can the earth itself have consciousness? If it did, why is it just sitting back and letting us destroy it? What do you say to skeptics like that?
That's a great question. I will answer it. But before I do, I also want to touch on the telesterion. That was the ruins of the temple that you just described, that you drove by. The telesterion was where the Eleusinian mystery initiations and ceremonies happened. And I wanted to give a little perspective on that. That building held 5,000 people for the ritual, okay? And it required an oath of secrecy. You could not enter that ceremony without taking an oath of secrecy. And that oath was never broken. Over 1,000 years, there were no incidents of people describing the preparation of the drink or the ceremony itself. Now, historians would say, well, that's because it was enforced by the penalty of death. But that doesn't explain it, because people would still talk anyway. Historians and academics speculate that the reason that no one ever talked about it was because they couldn't, that the experience was so profound that nobody even wanted to talk about it. It was an experience of the ineffable, the indescribable. All right, now about that intelligence of the earth. Well, we could answer that question from the standpoint that we can find all kinds of examples of the intelligence of the earth inside of us and around us. What is our immune system? Well, our immune system is basically the same immune system that's in plants, and it's a self-organizing intelligence that protects from another kind of intelligence, which is pathological. And so there are microbes, and microbes have their own intelligence, and they reproduce, and they want to eat, and they have all these survival strategies. But our body has another kind of intelligence, okay? And it's ongoing at a cellular level. Now, when our immune system breaks down, we could say that the intelligence of our immunity, which was created at birth and has been maintained throughout our life, that form of intelligence broke down. And when the body dies, we can say that that particular manifestation of intelligence has returned to the earth. But if we look at where that came from, it came out of the elements of the earth. And that's part of the answer, is that the earth is the foundation that gives the elements for beings to take incarnation, okay? And so therefore, we could also answer that excellent question from the standpoint, why are we destroying it? Well, we could talk about this as a disconnection, that the human consciousness has evolved to a particular level where it is now separate from the Gaian mind, okay? It is now separate from the intelligence of the earth. And then we could ask the question, well, why did the earth create a kind of organism that had the intelligence to destroy the earth? All right. Now, the earth created the conditions for human life to come out. And if we look back in terms of evolutionary history, guess where it really started? It started with the first flower, okay? So in biological history, the timeline of the earth and the evolution, the conditions for life to give rise to higher forms of consciousness, such as human beings, started with the first flower. And the first flower happened after about 400 million years of paleobotany, where the food chain was very limited and there was limited oxygen on the earth and all of this. And with the first flower, then the entire biosphere of the earth changed. And that's what made it possible for humans to come out. So this is one tangent that I won't go down, but we could also say the basic question that you are asking is, why is the earth just being there and humans are destroying it? And the answer is that we have evolved a particular consciousness. Now, this has direct relevance to the use of entheogens, because entheogens are historically sensitizing agents that help people to feel their biological unity. And they help people to feel psychic unity. They help people to feel their connectedness energetically to the environment, to themselves, to people in the ceremony, to the elements of the earth. And so I think that many people who are listening to this webcast here have probably had some experience of being sensitized by entheogens. And that's why it's extremely important to do the entheogens in the right container, in the right context, because you're going to get very sensitive. And if you get highly sensitive, I mean, some people might remember, like, back in the 60s, taking a hit of really strong LSD and then going into a grocery store and then realizing that civilization was really on the wrong track. Okay. It makes you sensitive to the environment. And that is historically one of their greatest uses. In the context of indigenous cultures, in the context of these, larger ceremonies like the Eleusinian mysteries, they are all about helping the human mind get reconnected. And it has been recognized for a very long time, thousands of years, that the human mind has evolved to a point of separation where it is destructive and it needs to be brought back into harmony, and it needs to be sensitized or it will hurt itself. And this is also one of the basic functions of initiation ceremonies in general, everywhere, but especially with the entheogens and especially for young men. Every culture has recognized that adolescent males are a dangerous species that can harm society, that can harm the tribe, that can harm the culture unless they are initiated. And so every culture historically has had a way of helping a young man become a man, helping a boy transform into a man. And it usually is the counterpart to what the girl goes through to become a woman, which is childbirth. And childbirth is an initiation, partly, greatly, through pain, and emerging on the other side as an adult. And so initiation ceremonies for young men have always had some parallel with that they have gone through some ordeal. They've had to go off on their own and be alone in the woods. They have had to, kill their first tiger. They've had to do something extreme that helped them to move beyond adolescence into manhood. And in that process of doing that, they were integrated into society because they were no longer uninitiated. And that means that they became responsible to society. And so in a certain way, we have lost not only the tradition of initiations just in general for adolescent males, but we have lost the traditions of initiations into our relationship with the earth. And I think that that's where we can say that the entheogens have played such a valuable role, is that in these ceremonies that they help people to become sensitized. And you can actually feel, physically, you can feel the elements of the earth moving through you. And one of the very common experiences is the dissolving of the boundaries of the sense of self, the dissolving of separation, physically, elementally, psychically, psychologically, mythologically. So the entheogens help to dissolve these borders and help us to enter into these deeper states of interconnectedness And so I think that's the answer, is that this has been a very old problem for a long time. I don't think it was there originally so much, in early, if we go way back, 50,000 years, I don't think that there was a separation so much. But I believe that when agriculture started bringing people together and cities started to develop and power started to become, more hierarchical, then we gradually started to get more separated from close proximity to the earth. And at the same time, it started to develop our self-awareness and our consciousness in very interesting ways that gave us more of a sense of self-identity individually and collectively. And ever since then, we've been trying to find ways to reconnect again. That's how I would answer it.
And I have to add, thinking about everything that you've just shared, that the psychedelic, plant medicine, entheogenic, sacred plant, whatever term you want to use, renaissance is happening right now when we are positioned and has been emerging since we as a culture began to have the capacity to not only destroy ourselves but leave literally a scorched earth behind us, if not worse, while at the same time these rituals that you were talking about, particularly for young men, have all but disappeared, right? This all sort of coming together at the same time. It's could very easily, I'll just put it this way, be interpreted as not being a coincidence. And if so, right, that would even sort of bolster your argument about the whole idea of a Gaian mind or a Gaian consciousness or intelligence operating to preserve itself as well as that which it has created with a certain level of consciousness. But with all of that aside, and I'm sure we could have 5, 6, 7 hours of conversation about that, and they'd be the best conversation ever in my whole life. David, let's talk a little bit about your own journey into the entheogenic world, because I suspect you didn't come out of your mom's womb and go to kindergarten and all this sort of stuff, and then just wake up one day hyper involved in and engaged with entheogens as a concept. How did you evolve into this place? Tell us a story.
I will tell you a story. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
And this is the first place that I have told this story, actually.
Oh, man, I'm honored. Amazing.
Publicly.
Thank you.
Publicly. Okay, well, it actually goes back to ancient Greece. And that's because my father was very interested in Greek mythology. And he took the family when I was 5 and 6 years old to live in Greece. And some of my earliest childhood memories were those temples. And so when I came back and was in elementary school in Southern California, I was different. Okay. And I had from then on a strong interest in other cultures and in ancient cultures and in the magical side of ancient cultures. All right. So that's kind of the background. But then we fast forward through elementary school to age 19. Okay. 1973. And I am wandering around in Mexico and Guatemala with my friend Warren. And we are walking, hitchhiking, taking buses, riding in the back of trucks, and we're just going around having adventures. But he had heard about Maria Sabina. And he said, the Beatles went to this village, Huautla, and we should go and see if we can eat some mushrooms. And so I said, yeah, let's do it. Well, it turned out that that was a life-changing event in many ways. And my personal story is not as important as the implications of it, because my personal journey with all of this is actually a miniature version of the mythological archetypal journey that a young man can have. And the experience culminated in my having a very clear visionary instruction to go find teachers. Okay. So this is one cycle. Okay. Altogether, I have had 3 cycles where the entheogens called. One was that, which I will tell you the details of, which happened in the mountains of Oaxaca after meeting Maria Sabina. The second was a separate phase that I did on my own, experimenting with very high doses of entheogens. And then the third was a period of many years when I was actively involved in the Native American church. Okay, so 3 cycles. Now, the experience in Huautla was very interesting. I did meet Maria Sabina, but I did not participate in a ceremony with her. Instead, I had an experience where I walked up the mountainside, and this was before there were roads, okay, in these mountains. I walked up a muddy path to the house of Maria Sabina in the dark, and it was raining. And I got to her house, her mud thatched house, and I went to the door, and her daughter was sitting outside, and I asked, is Maria Sabina home? And she said, yes. And I said, can I get some mushrooms? And she said, I don't know. And so I just stood there at the door looking in. Inside this room, there was gold light moving all over. And there was an altar, which was just a table. And on this altar was a picture of Jesus. And then there were all these candles. And then over the altar were all these gold ribbons, okay, like gold tinsel hanging down. And so the candles are throwing gold light all around the room over this altar with Jesus. Now, that's a culturally interesting thing to understand, because in the Mazatec culture for several centuries, it was integrated, the use of the Psilocybin mexicana, okay, the teonanactal, the flesh of God, was integrated with Christianity, and the mushrooms were regarded as the flesh of Jesus and the tears of Jesus that gave people healing visions. Okay. And so I was just standing there, soaking wet and looking in this house just looking in this mud room filled with this golden light with this image of Jesus on the altar. And then Maria Sabina walked in, and I had an experience just observing her. And that experience was that she was the oldest human being I had ever seen. And she looked 1,000 years old, literally. And she was only about 3 feet tall. And she was wearing a tunic that was embroidered with all of these animals and plants and flowers and stars and moons and everything. And she walked into the room and she was smoking the butt of a cigarette. Okay. And she walked up to her altar, looked around, looked at me, and her daughter said something like, he'd like to get some mushrooms. And she said, I don't have any. And then she walked out. And that was my experience with Maria Sabina. But later that night, when I was with my friend Warren, and we were in our residence, which was just a rented room, we had other companions who were traveling, sort of coming and going, and one of them actually got mushrooms from her, and we enjoyed those. And in that experience, everything just turned to stars. Okay, a lovely, peaceful evening in Huautla. Now, that wasn't the experience that I wanted to tell you about. The experience that I wanted to tell you about was that I met some children. I went off wandering in the mountains and stayed with some Mazatec families. And one morning, I came wandering down this path in this little valley and by a stream. And there were two children there, a girl and a boy, and they were holding a banana leaf full of mushrooms, and they offered it to me. And they said, would you like to buy these from us? And so I said, yeah, I will buy them from you. And so that encounter with these two children, who may or may not have been real, actually, in retrospect, was the catalyst for the most profound vision that had far-reaching consequences up till now in different ways. And so I took those mushrooms, what they call the derrumbe mushrooms, the landslide mushrooms, the teonanacno. I took them down into this little valley where there was a little stone bridge over this flowing river. And I ate them. And I just sat there. And it was not like anything that I had experienced previously or since. Some mushrooms at higher doses can take you all the way down into the vibrating atomic level of reality, where you can actually see all the cells inside the body. Everything is buzzing and so forth, or you meet these planes of light that move through different dimensions. And it wasn't like that at all. It was like everything just got more real. It was like magical realism. Okay, it was a state of magical realism. And I enjoyed the state of magical realism in all kinds of ways. I noticed that the clouds were sentient. I noticed that the animals were sentient. I noticed that the plants were sentient. Many things could be said about that state, but something happened that took me into a trance. I was lying on the ground. I was looking in the sky. I went into a trance, and I had an encounter with an archetype. And the archetype was the archetype of the land and the people, and the archetype was the face of an old Mazatec man, shaman. And I had never seen a face like that. I mean, I had seen Maria Sabina's face. I had seen the Mazatec people, but I had never seen a face like that. I had no reference for it whatsoever. And so I think it was an actual encounter with an archetype because it wasn't in my subconscious. And this face was in the sky, and I was looking at it, and it was looking at me. And then I heard an instruction from this archetype that said, go find teachers. That's all. Go find teachers. And so it vanished, and I kind of got up and looked around. I thought, well, what does that mean? Okay, so then the next trance state revealed that I was high in the mountains, way, way far away from the culture that I had left behind that was really toxic and really confused. And I had actually entered into the old world. I had entered into the world of magic and the world of the archetypes. And I saw my life as a path that brought me to that place. And then I saw my life as a path that went back. And so I went back, and I went back with a purpose. And that purpose actually saved my life on my way back. And that purpose guided me to where now I can say, 50 years later, that I'm a person who spent most of my life seeking out teachers. And I went to the Himalayas and sought out teachers of Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. And I went to India to seek out teachers of Ayurveda. And I sought out teachers of Chinese medicine. And so with that instruction, it propelled me in a very specific direction. I received clear instructions, go find teachers. I fulfilled that. I went and found teachers, had many teachings, and based my life on that. Now, if we look at that in the broader context of an archetypal mythological process that a young man went through, then we can see that this is duplicated repeatedly in every culture where entheogens have been used in this particular way. For example, the Bwiti culture in West Africa uses the iboga root, and they use it to initiate young people into adulthood. And the culmination of a very, very intense, semi-toxic, cathartic kind of 3-day trance state is that you connect with a rainbow that touches the top of your head. And through that rainbow is transmitted information about who you are and what your purpose in life is. So I think that's the key point that you are raising here about initiation and about the role of entheogens in helping us to discover a purpose in life. And for me, I was very blessed because I had that purpose in life early. And I know that many people come to entheogens seeking a vision about what to do at any stage of life. Okay. And in the traditional cultures, this was why the ceremonies were done. It was a place not just for initiation to understand how to be an adult, but it was also what you did if you lost a loved one and you were grieving. What do you do when you're sick? What do you do when you are getting older? You know, what is your guiding vision now that you are approaching the end of your life? You know, we need ceremonies and we need insights and we need visionary guidance from the divine at every stage of life. But that's the one that affected me the most.
It is affecting me just hearing it. So let me first respond to what was some, just as an aside, incredible storytelling. People tell me I'm a good storyteller. Yo, I've got some competition in David Crow. I don't think I've ever said that about anyone before. Wow. But yeah, for those who are not familiar with Maria Sabina, right? So we got introduced through an email, and what snapped me to attention was when you use those words in your email. Explain to those who aren't familiar with who Maria Sabina is, exactly who she was. And I've got to say, right, like that was some really legendary storytelling. I'm viewing the hut right now and the cigarette, everything. 3 feet tall? Who was she?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, Maria Sabina came to the attention of the international community, actually, in the 50s. There was a mycologist by the name of Gordon Wasson, and he became interested in mushrooms and the mushroom tradition, the entheogenic mushroom tradition of the Mazatec Indians. So Gordon Wasson went to Huautla in the 50s and met Maria Sabina and sat with her in her all-night ceremonies where she would consume mushrooms with the patient, and then she would transmit the information about the nature of the diagnosis and the treatment. Okay. And he recorded some of these ceremonies, and there is actually a set of cassettes that is available. It's a rare collector's item, and a book that shows the pictures that Gordon Wasson took. But guess where she was introduced to the world? Life magazine. Gordon Wasson presented Maria Sabina in an article in Life magazine. And then when people heard about this, then they started going to Huautla. And some of the famous people who went to Huautla included the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Dr. Andrew Weil. And it turned out that I was actually staying in a home of a woman named Julia, who was a curandera, who gave her guests, supplied her guests with mushrooms for their visionary journeys and performed ceremonies for them. And this was the same residence and the same curandera that Andrew Weil met. So there was some interesting crossover culturally, but by the time that my friend Warren and I got there, things were pretty quiet. Okay, there was this kind of the town was overrun when the Beatles were there. Okay,
I bet
but
it was.
by the time I got there, it was pretty quiet, but it was extremely remote. I mean, just getting to this place was a one-lane dirt road up the side of this mountain, and at one point, I mean, a little more storytelling here. You look out of one side of the bus, and the cliff is right here, and you look out the other side of the bus, and there's nothing. It's just a drop, okay? And at one point, the bus got hung up on a boulder, and everybody had to get out and push, okay? That's it was really remote, okay?
Wow.
So Maria Sabina was a renowned curandera that was introduced to the world by Gordon Wasson, a mycologist. That's the short answer.
Thank you. And that context is important. You spending time telling the story, it was interesting to hear, even if she was just some random person, but really getting context. This is seeing a significant historical figure and someone who is, at a minimum, was heavily involved in some of the inspiration or the triggers for inspiration for some of the most influential artists of the 20th century. It's a really big deal, and more. Not to mention one could argue the person who ultimately led to the entire psychedelic renaissance that is the subject of this podcast, as well as infinite discussions everywhere. This is a figure of that magnitude. So this was a story well worth sharing, as was your story about this face that you saw. Again, I could imagine his face right now as you were telling it. And one of the things that happened during my own psilocybin experience was an encounter with an archetypical figure that was unexpected. Those that know me know that, probably like you, I've been obsessed with Greek myths ever since I was a little boy, and I haven't really cared that much about the others. I might have known a little bit about them here or there, but they haven't really spoken to me. But in my journey, the beginning figure that appeared was Anubis, the archetypical figure from Egyptian mythology in the shape of a jackal that represented death, the weighing of the soul, and of course, implicitly through death, change. Now, integration was necessary for me because we always want to make sure that we point to as something to heavily investigate if you are someone who's listening to or watching this show, so that you are best prepared to deal with whatever messages come your way. But for me, it was not only to sort of deal with the psychological impact of it, but to begin to unpack the heavy duty, intense, and detailed symbolism that I received during my journey. And that's what many people report: symbolic or veiled messages. Perhaps they can't hear it any other way. Perhaps that's the way their mind speaks. Perhaps just that's the way that the plants are speaking to them, the entheogens. But this was pretty doggone direct. I mean, you don't get more direct than seek out teachers. And so what I'm taking away here is, and then you talked about it having this huge impact on what you did and the trajectory of your life. Then tying it to rituals that we have, that whether you're a young man seeking to integrate and become a productive member of society, not just warmongering and killing people or doing whatever you might do next, all sorts of wanton things, but also, right, for the different life phases that you might be going through, purpose, all of the phases that we have. You even talked about 3 different phases of your relationship with entheogens. I assume in one way or another, you're talking about 3 different phases in your life that may have had variations in their purpose, in their meaning, and even the process. We've had episodes on this show where we've talked about psilocybin helping people um, John Waller and Sheila Pearl are the guests for those who wish to look this up, talked about psilocybin helping give meaning, give purpose to the last phases of life, even death itself. And so what you're talking about is something that is so profound, so universal, that when you said at the top of the hour that entheogens are sources of power, to me, if anything, that's an understatement. Yet, we have this source of power that we're tapping into. You hear all the time about entheogens causing flip outs, freak outs, suicides, attempts to bring down planes. So, while you're killing yourself, you're bringing hundreds of other people down with you, right? All this sort of stuff. And I don't think, I could be wrong, I don't think that entheogens would be the cause of such controversy and there would be such resistance to them if people didn't feel like there were extreme consequences if one has a bad experience with them. And then the other thing that I have heard just talking to folks on the street is, oh, my friend so and so, she was having a perfectly normal, happy life, and she did XYZ entheogen and had a psychotic break, and she's never been the same, right? So with power comes responsibility, but also comes risk. Going back to the original theme of the episode, getting real about the risks. Okay, show us some perspective. How do I back away from that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really important subject. Now, my experience here comes from my clinical practice. So I shared this personal journey, told some stories that were about earlier in life that were catalysts that opened the door and gave me the motivation, showed me the direction, gave me the vision and inspiration to pursue studies in natural medicine. And natural medicine is also deeply linked to spiritual practices. And so those entheogenic experiences happened at a unique time and place with a unique purpose. And the rest of the timeline is filled in with how that vision was integrated into my studies of plant medicine in ethnobotanical traditions, such as Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, Tibetan medicine, African medicine, South American medicine. I've studied all of these. And those medical systems are all entwined with spiritual practices. And the spiritual practices are everything from Chinese medicine being rooted in Taoism, which is full of alchemy and Qigong, and Ayurvedic medicine being rooted with yoga and the Tantras and the Vedas, and Tibetan medicine being rooted in Buddhism and so forth. But the medicine is always inseparable from the spiritual lineages. And that's the answer to that question about the power. Okay. Now, I mentioned my clinical practice because in my clinical practice, what I have seen is that people can have serious problems from entheogens. And I've seen many cases of it. And I know why it happened and I know how it happened because I went through the experience and I've studied it deeply. And I also studied it from the standpoint of the spiritual practices and herbal medicine in general. Okay, so it has given me some insight and understanding into what happened. And there's different ways to describe it. But the simple version that I think is universal is that the personality structure, the mind, and its identification as an ego, as a separate self, the ahamkar, as it is said in the Vedas, the sense of self is overwhelmed. The sense of self receives so much information so quickly that it becomes disoriented and can't find its way back to its sense of self again. And so it's a disorienting experience, and you have to have a well integrated sense of self to approach these things, okay? Because it's going to take apart your sense of self, and you have to have a sense of self that's ready for that, okay? And so what I can say is that in some of my subsequent cycles of experience, for example, when I was training in the Native American church for several years, you know, carrying the drum and taking care of the fire and carrying the cedar and doing all of these different officer positions in the Native American church. I had entheogenic experiences that took apart my sense of self, again, that were so profound that if I was not spiritually prepared for them, that it could have flipped me into a psychotic state. But I knew what was happening. And I was able to observe with equanimity as if I were practicing Vipassana meditation on my own mind. I knew what Vipassana meditation was. And I knew what Tonglen, the process of taking and sending, suffering and blessings, I knew that practice. And so when I would experience this profound disintegration of my sense of self, and I could feel horrible, horrible suffering inside of me, just feel totally sick, I could recognize that it was because the ceremony was for a cancer patient. And I was losing all of my boundaries. And I could recognize it. I had the background, I had the training to identify the psychic processes that were happening. Now, that's something that a lot of people don't have that training and that background for, to understand it. And this is where the entheogens are out of a cultural container. So if we go back and we look at the mystery schools of the Eleusinian cult, then what we see is that people did not end up going into that all-night ceremony until they had gone through several years of preparation and purification. And they were prepared to have their personality, identity dissolved and come face to face with the divine, which happened to be in the form of the Greek gods and goddesses because it was in that culture. And the same thing happens through sequential training in the traditional cultures of the Amazon. You don't just jump into this, get off your plane and go drink the ayahuasca. That's not how it was. You were trained a step at a time growing up. It was part of your culture. It was part of your worldview. You had an elder to guide you through it that told you what was happening. And then you could reach these higher and higher levels of disintegration of the sense of self until you could reach the highest encounters with the divinity and just, you know, power, and come back and reintegrate it. And so that's the main reason that people have problems, is that the sense of self is not strong enough for the sense of self to be strongly affected. That's our personality structure in psychological terms. Okay, that's our identity, our ego. And so the entheogens can break the ego. And if the ego is broken, then it means that the mental processes are broken, because the mental processes, the mind stream, is governed by a sense of self. And if the sense of self is shattered, then the mind stream just drifts off into the collective consciousness. And that's schizophrenia. Okay. So it's all about preparation, and it's all about the container, and it's all about the guidance and the training and the groundedness inside oneself.
What you're saying, albeit framed in a way that I have never heard before, at least so eloquently, is that the risks associated with these things, the dangers, are in large part because culturally or personally, people simply haven't been prepared. And this goes as to the situations. I mean, I'm not going to speak universally here, but some of the stories that I've personally heard about people having bad experiences or having unfortunate consequences, right? They the example I gave earlier was this about a plane, was someone who had taken some psilocybin, some magic mushrooms. He had, after his journey was over, he was unsure of whether he was in reality or not, whether he had ever left his journey behind. So to test it, he decided he was going to bring down a plane that he was flying on. Well, it would have proven, I don't know if he would have survived to prove it, but it would prove to the world that he was in reality, right? But he had taken it, from my understanding, at a party, basically at around a fire camp or something like that, just some random thing, without preparation. And he was obviously mentally unstable in the first place. He had had some other issues going on. And so we're talking someone who is not prepared. And so I feel in my heart what you're saying, and I share all of that so that people understand that these truly are things. When we talk about harm reduction, or when we talk about making sure that you work with someone who's good, or that you're ready, or that you're not doing this frivolously, or anything like that, that there's real meaning. Talk to me about what this triggers in you, and talk to me about, well, there's lots of things out there that can be dangerous if you are not prepared and you imbibe of them or indulge. Gambling, you can go into a casino, and if you're not psychologically or spiritually prepared, I've read stories about people going to the bathroom literally on the stools at slot machines. Why? Because they can't leave. They are doing something that they were not psychologically or mentally or spiritually prepared to do, and this consequence happens. Am I crazy?
No, you're very sane.
Right answer.
And asking some really astute questions. So I believe that you were inviting me to comment on the general question of life is full of all these dangers. How do we know whether we're prepared or not, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't. And at the same time, we can go back and look at some of the historical context here, all right? The historical context is that there's training, okay? In the past, in these cultures, children didn't become adults without a lot of training. They were trained in all kinds of things. They were trained in herbs. They were trained in weapons. They were trained in hunting. They were trained in visions. They were trained in fasting and solitude. They were trained in ceremony. They were trained in problem solving and communication. Okay, that's what old societies did, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when it comes to our society, that a lot of the pathologies are simply that we don't have the social fabric for promoting sanity in our everyday life now. If you look at these old cultures, the way they spent their time, it was very connected to the cycles of the season, and that was very connected to the cycles of the plants, and that was very connected to the cycles of the ceremonies, and that was very connected to the cycles of the food and the preparation. So the cycles of life were very well integrated and very well connected, okay? And so what we can say is that we are living in a very fragmented time. We are living in a time when the human psyche is fragmented. The human psyche is so broken right now that we don't even know who we are individually or collectively, what we should do.
Yeah.
In old cultures, which give us an exemplary way to think about this, and I don't idealize old cultures either, because I have been in some of these, obviously not in the past, but indigenous cultures have lots of problems also, and they did historically as well. It's important not to idealize, but to understand what they were doing and the strengths of what they were doing. And what we can say is that the cycles of life, the rhythms of life were very integrated with the earth, with the seasons, with the plants, ceremonies, and the archetypes of each culture. Okay. And that is one aspect of mental health, is that collectively we are healthy. Collectively, we are taking care of the right priorities. And this is one of the biggest pathologies of our collective psyche right now, is we have completely become disconnected from our priorities. Okay. Our priorities have nothing to do anymore with biological reality that's taking place. And this is one of the great concepts or discussions or theories that has been advocated for a very long time. Terence McKenna was a big advocate of this, that in order to save humanity from the impending disaster that we are headed towards, that we need the entheogens to get reconnected to a healthy psyche again.
Yeah.
The entheogens can heal the collective psyche that is broken, that is so broken that we are doing all of these destructive things. All right. And so what Terence was advocating is that we use the entheogens to help us reconnect with the Gaian mind, to go back to our beginning of our conversation. And he was correct. And, of course, that's also what Timothy Leary was advocating in kind of a pathological way also.
Mm-hmm.
But people who have an entheogenic experience recognize that this is a medicine for the psyche. And if only everybody could have this experience, everything would be okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right. That's kind of utopian and it's idealistic and it's not very reality based because entheogens aren't for everybody.
Yeah.
But what we can say is that the human psyche is everybody and everybody plays a role in it. And the healthier each individual becomes, the healthier the psyche becomes. And so therefore, the people who are engaged in seeking answers, seeking healing, people who are on a spiritual quest, people who are seeking visions, people who are seeking knowledge and wisdom, people who are seeking teachers and lineages, who are cultivating spirituality in whatever way, it will make them healthier. And that is also the hope for our collective broken psyche. It's not just the entheogens, it's also all of these other lineages that have come to us from all of these traditions that have also become broken. Qigong, Taoism, alchemy, yoga, Vedas, Tantras, all of these things are ways to heal the psyche because they lead to spiritual awareness and they lead to illumination and they lead to insight and wisdom and compassion. And all of these things are methods. And especially when we start combining them, and that is really the unique, unusual opportunity that we have, is that we can sample so many things and we can learn so much, but we also have to be careful because we still need to consider, are we really ready to am I ready to have my ego broken apart? And to just conclude that thought, what I would say is that there are methods that you can do that will do that gradually and gently. And as you've had some experience with that, then you can face the power of the entheogenic plants, more fully and understand what's happening. And it doesn't happen this way to everybody either. Here's another very important point, is that a lot of times when people go on a bad trip, when they have a bad trip, when the entheogen pushes them into a really unpleasant hell realm, what they're actually experiencing is the inside of their body. They're experiencing unpleasant pathologies inside the body.
Whoa.
And so it takes a lot to be able to discriminate between the body and the mind, you see. because a lot of times, one example of a bad trip, one of my patients told me about, he said he took mushrooms at a party. Well, that's a bad idea right there. Do mushrooms in a ceremony, okay, at least. And he said he took mushrooms at a party, and he was convinced that the walls were attacking him. Okay, well, that was his subjective perspective. Guess what everybody else saw? He was banging his head on the walls. Okay. Now, that shows us that there's a very close link between the body and the mind, because in his case, he was also not well physically. All right. And so we have to also consider that. And this is why people have to be very careful. I have had a number of people ask me, my father has dementia, and I think it would be really good if he did mushrooms to unblock all of those old traumas that are in his brain. And my response to that is, his brain is already working at a decreased rate of neurological processing. You have no idea what's going to happen if you start running, 1,000,000 volts more through it. And so my suggestion in these kind of situations is start with microdosing. That's okay. That's another way to kind of get your body comfortable with it. Start with microdosing. And that's going to kind of introduce your brain to the substance. Okay. And if that feels good, if it feels nice, if it has a positive effect on you, then that's a good sign. Then you can continue kind of preparing yourself biologically, physiologically, as well as, spending some time in solitude, spending some time doing the cultivation of the chi, cultivation of the power, go on a vision quest, go sit out in the woods by yourself for a couple of nights. If you can sit out in the woods by yourself and face your fear, you can probably handle mushrooms, So those are a few practical things that I also throw in that mix. And what we're really doing is we're trying to reintegrate our own psyche back together again at a deeper level. And that is how all of this starts to add up, because really we are in a critical time and the collective psyche is very sick. But at the same time, there is very, very high levels of interest in spiritual practice and application of spiritual practice. And many, many people are coming out of this period of time with great wisdom and compassion and insight. And this may be another answer to your earlier question. Why is the earth just doing this? Maybe it isn't that the world is something we have to save. Maybe it's just like it's been for the past several thousand years, that in all of these places and all these times, there's always been suffering. There's always been chaos and war. But out of these cultures, there's been these flourishing, these flowerings of enlightened people, enlightened culture that's come out of it as well. And that's happening now. And the entheogens are part of this.
And David, what an unbelievable privilege it is to have this conversation with you on a platform like this that is so integrally connected to that exact flourishing. Whoa.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity and for your presence and your wisdom and experience and for doing Webdelics.
It is a privilege to be part of Webdelics. There has been so much that you and I have discussed that I will take with me for a long time. Perhaps something that I will take away from this that I never would have imagined having such impact. But when we think about entheogens as connected to things like archetype, as connected to things like the universal consciousness's expressions through mythic images like that man who told you to go find teachers in your vision. The image that you gave of Maria Sabina, right? That's going to stick with me because it is a living image of a mythical archetype that only became a mythical archetype because of her role with psychedelics. And in a way, what I take away from that personally is that even if in any given moment you are not facilitating a journey or preparing for a journey or preparing someone for a journey or directly interfacing with the plants, with these entheogens, the engagement that we have with them itself is creating that sense of the ethereal, that sense of the timeless, that sense of the mythic, within all that it touches. And so perhaps why does that image stick with me so much? It's not just because it's striking, although it is, but because it's pointing to the true expansiveness of our relationship to plants. David, if there is one thing that you would like to share with us or something that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to yet, by all means, let it out. We want to hear.
Well, thank you. I think that's all I want to say is just thank you. And specifically, Scott, thank you to you for the work that you're doing. But I also want to thank everybody who's in your audience for your interest. And I consider people's interest in spiritual subjects to be a form of good karma, a form of blessings. You see, because there's so many people who have no interest in spiritual topics. And if we have an interest in spirituality, which includes the entheogens, and if we have an interest in self-healing, then that tells us that we have good fortune spiritually. We have the good fortune to be interested in spirituality. We have spiritual blessings to be interested in spirituality. And furthermore, if we actually get to the point where we start studying, listening to podcasts, attending retreats, doing ceremonies, attending ceremonies, then this is the expression of our good spiritual fortune to be able to use this life for that purpose. And so this is something that I always feel strongly about as something important to recognize, that there are so many people in this world who don't have this good fortune to be interested in spirituality. And they don't have the good fortune to have the resources to follow up on their interest in spirituality. And so to have the resources and the opportunities and the interest is incredible good fortune. And so thank you to all of you for your interest, and Scott for facilitating it all.
I don't even know what to say, except thank you right back, and to move right into the final topic of the day, which is another way we can express gratitude to you by satiating our own selfish desires to know more about what you're doing, where we can find you, what's going on in your life, your links, all those sort of stuff. His links, David's links, by the way, are in the show notes or the captions below, but nonetheless, tell us what you're doing, where we can find you, and say them out loud.
Thank you. I am practicing herbal medicine. I am doing telemedicine consultations. I am teaching online courses. And those courses include natural health, herbal medicine, and meditation practices. And my website is crowconsultations.com, CROW, consultationsplural.com. And that is where you can see everything that I do. So thank you for that opportunity.
And those places are well worth visiting. If you are listening to or watching this episode and were as compelled by it as I was, if you're on YouTube, please leave this video a thumbs up, press the subscribe button, make sure the bell rings, all that stuff, so new episodes can be sent to you and you can get notifications the minute they come out. If you are listening to this on an audio platform like Spotify or Apple, please subscribe. Leave us a review on an audio platform if you enjoyed this. And like I mentioned earlier, please comment below the YouTube video so we can hear what your thoughts are. We want to engage with you, the audience, because you are who this is all about. Once you've done all of that good stuff, be sure to go to our website at webdelics.com, WEBDELICS.com. Subscribe to our newsletter for a whole bunch of other amazing content. Then go to our other social media sites and subscribe there, because we have different things coming out on every platform, and it's all fascinating and engaging. And then above all else, be sure to come back next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.